Hi, my name is Brian Kilcourse, and I'm a managing partner at RSR Research in the United States. I'm here on behalf of IORMA, and I'm also here to interview my business partner, Steve Rowen. We co-wrote a report just a couple of months ago on the state of the store in retail. So, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about RSR, and then we'll get going.
Sure. Well, a little bit about myself. I've been in retail for a very long time. Put myself through school, actually working in retail. And Brian, as I'm sure you can relate to, I've tried to leave a couple times. And just like they say in the movies, every time you think you're out, they pull you back in. So I've done pretty much everything you can do. I've worked for technology companies developing software. I've been a retail specific journalist. And as it just turns out, as you know all too well, I have been an analyst now for 17 years, if that's about right. And you and I started this company back in 2007. And for anyone who's listening and who's unaware of the RSR brand, the reason we did that was pretty simple. All of us founding partners were former practitioners who were really hungry for a type of analysis that did not exist then and would like to think, apart from what we do, doesn't really exist quite now. It's a special thing or a unique thing that we've done, which is combine our own expertise and our own opinions, of which we have plenty, as you'll find out here today, with a series of benchmark data reports and the data that they yield every year to help keep those opinions informed. So we run anywhere between 10 to 12 benchmark reports a year. They're topic specific to retail, sometimes merchandising, sometimes store, sometimes artificial intelligence. Some of these are reports that we run year in, year out. And what we're going to share today comes from our most recent report, which is the store report, which just came out about a month or so ago in the late summer of 2022. And what we find from that data are the things that retailers self-identify as their biggest challenges, and probably just as importantly, what they plan to do with those challenges, how they plan to get themselves out of them. So what we do at RSR is we combine all the data that we collect year in and year out on these very hot topics, and then combine it with our own expertise and practitioner backgrounds and make suggestions for the entire industry to try to help everyone elevate the game, both retailers and the technologists who are creating solutions for them as well.
That's our story, and we're sticking with it. That's for sure, Steve. And you and I have been doing this for a long time now. One of the reports that we've done every year since our first year is the state of the retail store. And if I were to go back 5 years, that would have put us in the time when, in the popular press, this notion of the retail apocalypse was reigning supreme. And the stores were dead. Nobody liked stores. Consumers hated stores, et cetera, et cetera. I actually used to like to go to London, to Oxford Street, because it was an antidote to that. The stores were exciting and fun, and I enjoyed going into them like everybody else does. And it was the antidote to all the talk about how stores were going to die and die soon. But then something happened. And what happened was omni-channel shopping, and it was accelerated by COVID. And now here we are coming out on the backside of the pandemic, and omni-channel shopping has gotten very real for the majority of consumers. We'll define that in a second. Actually, I'll ask you to define that. And the stores have got a new purpose in life, a new lease on life, and we discovered that in our report. So we're going to talk about that. First of all, talk to me a little bit about the dynamics in the store right now today, Steve. I just gave an overview of it. If you could fill in some of the details, that would be super.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I haven't heard the term retail apocalypse in a while. And now here we are, in October 2022, we're all fretting about the real apocalypse.
Don't talk about that.
War rages on in Eastern Europe. No, I mean, it's a fascinating point that you raise. A few years ago, we were all talking about the store is dead. That there was an awful lot of headline and an awful lot of newsprint wasted on the fact that a lot of retailers who were not necessarily leading edge or particularly customer focused were shuttering up their shops. And that is a function, as you and I have talked about endlessly, of corrections in the market, right? There were too many retailers, a few too many Me Too retailers. Some obviously do a much better job than others, and therefore those are the cream rises to the top. Those are the retailers that we continue to talk about as leaders and winners. And I know we'll get into a lot of what separates them here today. in the way they operate the stores and the way they staff their stores and the way they arm those staff with more mobile technologies. But apart from all of that, when COVID came along, I think it forced, you and I often refer to it as an accelerant. COVID was an accelerant for trends that were already well underway. And what happened is all of us stopped our lives and reevaluated the way that we engage with retailers. Sure, we have problems to solve and we want to solve them as quickly and as painlessly as possible. But I think for an awful lot of us, these rote, shopping habits that we had ingrained into ourselves were completely and totally reevaluated. And that same thing happened for retailers themselves. They were forced in these months of downtime to say, what are we doing here at the big picture level, right? What is the purpose of our store versus our online channel versus our ability to ship from our online channel to our store? Maybe there are people who want to shop these things differently than we've given them, the opportunity to so far. And so whereas for so long you had this trend of consumers just sort of hacking the system however they could to solve the problems they had, buy the products that they wanted from whoever was able to provide them to them. Now, all of a sudden, you have the retailers stopping and taking a hard look at what is our role? How do we fit into this? And what role is stores going to play for us? So when we conducted this research in the summer of this year, the very first thing we wanted to ask retailers, above all else, above what are you going to do? Where are you going to spend your money? What are you going to do with your employees? The very first thing we wanted to know is, what do you think about the role of the store? And has it in any way changed? And right out the gate, the moment we looked at the data, one of the things that leapt right off the page at us, 91% of retailers strongly agree. We give them 4 choices. You can disagree strongly, you can agree with us, or you can really take it to that and say, I very much agree with what you're saying here. 91% of the people that responded to our survey, and these are qualified retailers, this is 100 and something retailers, said, we strongly believe that the entire role of the store has changed and the way that we are going to use it is going to change as a result. And that is something, Brian, you and I have been doing this report for a long time. We would not have seen those results 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, really at any other time.
That's so fascinating. So I'm looking at this data too. And one of the things that jumped out to me right away, and I'm looking at the strongly agree. So you added in the 91%, the agree and strongly agree, but and the strongly agree, the role of the stores has changed significantly since the beginning of the pandemic. That is a winner's choice, and we should probably describe what winners are. We define them as retailers that overperform the industry average for growth in sales. So, for example, this year, most retail organizations are pointing at about a 7% increase in sales. I guess this was before all the recent economic news hit. And those who perform over 7% would be classified as winners. And then there's average and underperformers. But the thing that we find out in our research is that retail winners typically have a very different point of view about the world, about the role of technology, the role of their employees, and the role of the stores themselves. And one of the things that I saw in this data was that by an over 20% difference, retail winners feel that the role of the stores has changed significantly. So 68% of those strongly agree, compared to only 44% of average and underperformers. What's going on there, Steve? What's the difference, and why is that happening?
Well, as far as why I just want to make sure I understand the question clearly. You're asking why are winners winning, or why are they addressing technology?
Why do they have such a strong opinion about the role of the store?
So, we got a little clever when we titled this report. As everyone knows, clever headlines make for more attention these days. And one of the things that we wanted to drill into when we set out to conduct this, before we had any idea of what the data was going to be, we knew we wanted to talk about how retailers could use stores in the modern environment to compete with Amazon. It's the elephant in the room. It's the 800-pound gorilla. Choose your way of acknowledging the fact that Amazon has come along and is eating everyone's lunch. One of the things that we talk about when we talk to retailers is how Amazon is always just one poor move on your part away. A consumer at any point, no matter what they're shopping for. It used to be only certain segments, right? It started with books, then it might be what's in music. It's everything you could possibly imagine. When you're looking for a table saw, I'm in the aisle, I mess up as a retailer, I lose that person. They're going to go to Amazon and buy that table saw. So it's really this notion of the biggest and baddest wolf that any of us have ever seen in the retail community is always one click away. So what winners have done is they've prioritized what they can use their stores for that Amazon can't. So when we were looking for a title for this report, it dawned on us. What can retailers do with stores that Amazon still can't? There's been a lot made in the press about what, Amazon test stores and using contactless and touchless, RFID and Bluetooth and all kinds of technologies so you can walk in, grab your stuff and go. But by and large, they're not there yet. They don't operate stores yet. We could talk endlessly about what they have and have not done with their one big store purchase of Whole Foods. But by and large, the physical world is still the domain of everyone else. So for retail winners, Brian, to your point about the best, they're looking at this as a massive competitive advantage that they have for now. And so their investment in technology, their staffing, educational purposes, their training purposes, trying to make the store as much of a destination as possible should be everyone's, number one priority. But for the best performers, they've recognized that's one direction they can run in, and they can run in hard right now.
Now I'm looking at this is a good point here because it brings in the notion of technology, but I'm going to expand it ever so slightly to say they're bringing many of the best parts of the digital world into the physical world. That's something that Amazon still can't do. And specifically, it gets down to the digital interaction via consumers' smart mobile devices. So I'm looking at the high value for the future of the stores. There's a really interesting differentiation between winners and everybody else. And in every mention here that I bring up, winners feel much more strongly about the value of these things. So more digital interaction with consumers while they're in the store via their smartphones. That's a winner's choice. More real-time visibility into the in-store activity. Again, a winner's choice. Bringing digital content to the sales floor with digital signage, electronic shelf labels. It's a winner's choice by far. More VIP specific promotions, more store mapping, store navigation, store within a store, order pickup lockers in or near the stores, more assisted selling, more community events in the stores, more self-service options, more reserved order pickup spaces, and more focus on product showrooming. Every single one of those has at least half of winners, and in some cases, 3/4 of winners, seeing that as a high value proposition for them going into the stores. Now, the interesting thing about that data point, Steve, is that the only thing that average and underperformers agree with winners on is the very first one, which is more digital interaction with consumers while they're in the store. In every other case that I mentioned, winners feel strongly about it and average and underperformers do not. So big difference in how they view the store in the future. This brings up a couple of other points, though. We talk in the industry, and of course, people like us write about this all the time, is this notion of personalization. And personalization means different things to different people, but we didn't ask them to define personalization. We just asked them to choose. So there's a data point in here that also points out that personalization in its many definitions is really a winner's game. Can you comment on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's, we're deep into, at the top of the call, I mentioned we do topic specific reports. And right. The very next report that's coming, we have one actually coming out this week about artificial intelligence. And then about a month from now, we'll have one coming out about what we're calling the consumer experience. And what makes that report so interesting is it's across all platforms. It's across the right. store, it's across omnichannel. Right. But one of the things that we're finding in the early findings from that report is that retailers aren't necessarily focused on personalization. This might happen as a byproduct of a initiative that's being pushed from both sides at them. Vendors are certainly, you walk any show floor, you're going to hear an awful lot from the vendor community about the need to personalize offers, personalized prices, personalized products in stores, online, wherever it might be. And consumers on the other side, as you and I know, are going to launch a consumer survey to find out how much are consumers really crying for that. Right. But for retailers themselves right now, it seems to be heads down work to, at very least, do no harm. Right? We might not be able to offer personalization in the truest sense of the terms, the way the vendor community would want us to, or the way consumers would want us to. But as long as we can, retain relevance and offer products and offer them in a way that fits into the way consumers shop, into their lifestyle, into maybe their specific demographics. I'm a soccer mom. Please don't show me that table saw that I was just talking about, right? Maybe please show me more about Tupperware that would contain the orange slices I can bring to the soccer game. Things of that nature. So personalization may be a bit of a stretch as it relates to where retailers are planning to take their stores in the near-term future, but relevancy is certainly top of mind for them,
yeah.
and we are very happy to see that.
Well, just looking at the data here, this is fascinating. This again was a winner's choice. 79% of winners strongly agree with the notion that personalizing content available to shoppers is viable in the context of the current store environment. That's a big number for an RSR research report.
Yeah.
51% of winners agree that localization of the product is viable in the current store environment. And those are big numbers because average and underperformers, it's almost the opposite. Only 28% of average and underperformers think that personalization is viable, and only 24% agree that that localization is viable. The other part of it is a little bit of skepticism. I think this is actually healthy, especially when you start talking about personalization versus relevance. Half of retail winners think that personalization and localization are overblown concepts. And I guess that's a ding on the reputation of analysts like you and me, Steve. We write about personalization and localization all the time. But in fact, retailers are being cautious. The context of these concepts is important. It's just not all personalization for everybody or hyper localization for every single store. It's within the context of the value that the brand is offering. So I think that's really fascinating. But again, it's a winner's choice. Average and underperformers are really not addressing these issues at all. And that seems to be the difference between those who are overperformers and those who are not. When we turn these into opportunities, I was a little surprised when we wrote the report, Steve, that said that the number one opportunity for retail winners, this is a shocker, was the ability to accept returns. Talk to me about returns.
Yeah, the ugly stepchild, right?
Yeah.
We've had. If you could listen into the anecdotal conversations Brian and I have had about the people in our lives and their shopping habits, and people who buy, say, 7 or 8 of something, knowing full well they're going to keep the one they like most and return the others, usually to the store so as to avoid any sort of postage. It's not a great behavior, and it's destroying retailers from the inside out. We talked an awful lot about at the beginning of the pandemic, the need to enable buy online, pick up in store, curbside pickup, certainly returns, without having to, get deep into the store itself. A lot of what was put in place at the onset of the pandemic was done with duct tape and chewing gum, right? And a lot of that had to do with returns. People were ordering a trove of things online, running to the store, basically throwing a bunch at it, getting into a back room, maybe sitting on a shelf somewhere. This is just lost revenue, as you and I have talked about endlessly. Yeah. So while a lot of retailers staple together these really hastily put together, returns endeavors, they're not well thought out, they're not elegant, and they're certainly not optimized to maintain profit. So it's really hurting retailers an awful lot. And the better a retailer is, the better their performance is. These retail winners that you mentioned, the more focused they're going to be on this, because this is absolutely hurting them. And so I think it's become a priority of necessity, is really what it comes down to.
Well, we've actually talked with IORMA. We did a couple of shoots with Steve Allen to talk about the future of returns. And it's fascinating because it is a really big issue. The point here that RSR research is highlighting is that winners are focused on it. According to this data, 60% of average and underperformers are still in denial about the whole returns issue. And it's going to come back to bite them, as you say. Yeah. This happens to be one of the areas where we saw some differences between verticals, between specialty and fashion versus hard goods versus general merchandisers versus fast moving consumer goods, about what do they do when they get a return. The thing I wanted to point out here is that the research shows pretty conclusively that retailers see returns processing in the store as an opportunity. They see it as an opportunity to get consumers into the store that might not have been there for the sale itself. Might have been a direct-to-consumer sale, but the return happens in the store. And retailers see that as an opportunity to talk to the consumer, to upsell, to cross-sell, to do all those important things. But the question still is, what do you do with the inventory? And there was an interesting data point that maybe you could talk about a little bit, Steve. I don't know whether you have it in front of you or not. It has to do with.
I don't have it directly in front of me, but if memory serves, it's that for fashion folks, it wasn't as much of a big deal.
Put it back on the.
You can literally just hang it right back on the rack, right?
Yeah.
No harm, no foul. Get a retagger and call life good. Whereas when you're dealing with consumer packaged goods, it becomes a lot more of an issue, right? You have to. It's very hard. It's very hard to hide that something has been bought and returned anymore. We could talk about environmentally, irresponsible packaging as it is. That's totally off topic for today. But with fashion, it's much less of an issue. With everyone else, much more of an issue. And obviously for, fast moving consumer goods, I don't know how many people return potato salad, but I can't imagine it's as big a deal for them as it is for someone. Yeah.
Somebody down at Marks and Spencer picks up something for dinner and then takes it back. I can't see that happening too often, but maybe it does. But just to share the data with you, for fashion and specialty, they try to put it back in the store on a sale rack as new whenever they possibly can, 44% of the time. That also happens to be true in fast-moving consumer goods. And putting it in the store as an open box or returned or a damaged item at discount, that seems to be a choice for general merchants. Those are, consumer products retailers, and also for fast-moving consumer goods. The unpopular choices, number one, with a bullet, was throwing it away. There was no retailer in our survey that said that's a good idea. And the second one, damned by faint praise, is returning it to the manufacturer. There was very little concurrence as far as that goes. So I think the way I read this is that retailers know that returns are going to be a big issue. Retail winners are particularly aware of it. They're pretty unclear what to do with the inventory once they get it, but their first inclination is to sell it if they can. Sell it as either a return item or an open box or damaged item, and move it down the road. I want to talk a little bit about the things that stand in the way. We call these organizational inhibitors in our reports, and these are always the reasons that retailers don't do what we think they should do or they agree is an opportunity for them. And the number one concern that they have is overall capital requirements. They never even get to the subject of ROI because it's so costly to change anything in the store. And I'd love to say that that's a surprise. It never is when it comes to the store because of what we call the store multiplier factor. And that, of course, is that if you take a $500 item and multiply it times the number of stores and the number of lanes in the stores or the number of employees in stores, you get a big number really, really fast. But there is a way around it. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit about that. The first one the retailers agree is a winner is this notion of piloting programs to specific stores or regions to prove the ROI. Essentially, this is create a pay-as-you-go type of an option. And retailers favor that. Half of retailers favor that as a top way to overcome this inhibitor. Can you talk a little bit about that, Steve? What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's something that we lean heavily on in most of our. So if you've read an RSR report, you know that we have this framework that we use, and at the end of the framework, in every report, we offer what we call Bootstrap Recommendations. And I know the term boot in the UK means a little different thing than it means here, but we're not recommending things that you should throw into your car. We're talking about recommendations that you can use to pull yourselves up by your bootstraps and help yourself get out of your own way. And as you note, Brian, the siloed nature, for anyone who's ever spent any time in retail knows, the siloed nature is the way it is, the way it was, the way it probably always will be. And when you end up with marketing sort of always pointing the blame at merchandising and merchandising always pointing the blame at store operations, probably one of the best things you can do at some point is stop the infighting, start a pilot program, get some results, and see what you see.
Right.
And it's this, sort of crawl, walk, run is the way a lot of technology vendors want to put it. If you could just get us in one store, we could prove our case to you. For retailers, it tends to be a really nice little opportunity, oftentimes, particularly if they're bigger, or even more so if they're one of these retail winners, where they might find a technologist who comes along and says, just give us a chance and we'll fund this out of our own pocket. Try it in one store, try it in 2 stores, try it in a region of stores. It's one of the things that we say to retailers all the time. If you can, find somebody who's willing to prove it to you and reap the benefits of it. The very worst, you'll end up with plots on a graph. You'll end up with data that you can use and say, okay, this sort of thing kind of works, maybe works, doesn't really work, maybe a little bit tweaking it could, all at, by and large, the minimal amount of effort put in and the minimal amount of disruption to your overall chain. But it's one of the things that we lean on, I think, in this report pretty heavily, is do not be afraid to experiment with these things. Fortune is going to favor the bold here. People do not want to shop in stores that feel the exact same way as they did when, the original version of Hawaii Five-0 was on television. And by and large, that's what most stores feel like today. You walk in and it feels the exact same as it did 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 20 years before that. So any opportunity to let somebody else foot the bill, to try something new and exciting, to make your store slightly more experiential, even if it's just the slightest bit, slightly more experiential, in order to keep someone from just making Amazon the default. So that all they ever do is just say, I need this, let's go to Amazon. I need this, let's go to Amazon. Give them some reason to come to your store. And pilot programs are a great way to try some of those new, sort of avant-garde, as if that term really applies to retail all that often, but those new experimental things that may or may not work, but you won't know if you don't try.
So I'd like to point out to our listeners that you're in Texas, and the boot means something entirely different in Texas than it does in the entire remainder of the world. But we'll leave that one right there. Leave that right there. The last part of our report is all about the technology enablers. So following our methodology. And one of the things I saw in our data is that there, again, is a big difference between how overperformers and underperformers see the value of technology. So this is another one of those strongly agree comments or questions. And the number one opportunity that retailers see for applying technology to these challenges and opportunities is, of course, with technology. And they say, and we ask them, does technology create a creative advantage and new sources of revenue generation? 73% of winners strongly agree with that notion. Now, 52% of average and underperformers also agree. So that's good news, bad news. The good news is that 52% of them agree with that. The other one is, where's the other 48%? But here's where things get really different. I'm going to read off these things, and at least half of the retail winners in our reports agreed with these statements. Technology is essential in making our employees smarter. The store should be more fun and easier for consumers. Technology's primary role is to help us control operational costs, and technology needs to change more quickly because customer tastes are changing. Now, in every single one of those cases, only half as many average and underperformers agreed with that statement. So this is nearly a fatal enthusiasm gap. Winners are already far ahead and thinking proactively about the value of technology. Underperformers are really holding back. And they're holding back for all kinds of reasons, but mostly for the reasons that you stated. And that is that it's not the way they used to do it. So this brings us finally to what are the kinds of things that we want to do with this technology. And I'm just going to read down the list very quickly, and then we can talk a little bit about them. Number 1, clienteling. Number 2, interactive displays. The third is the ability to use branded apps for value-adding offers. Customer instant checkout, something along the lines of Amazon Go. Endless aisle and assisted selling. Customer Wi-Fi portals, self-service for in-aisle self-help, customer mobile app checkout, et cetera, et cetera. These are all really exciting opportunities. But when we look at the winners versus others, we see that enthusiasm gap yet again. The thing that retail winners are most excited about when it comes to technology in the store is interactive displays. But right behind that is clienteling and CRM. The third one, just Barely behind that is the ability to use a branded app, self-service and in-aisle self-help. That's also popular for 65% of winners. And finally, customer Wi-Fi portals. And in no case that I just read do half of average and underperformers favor those choices. So we're seeing a really big divergence of opinion in terms of what the value of technology is in the store. And the report goes into this quite a bit. It also goes down the same path when it comes to empowering employees. The only thing that average and underperformers favor almost as much as winners when it comes to employee techs is in-store fulfillment, which of course is necessary just to survive in this world. But employee mobile communications, employee scheduling and task management, mobile point of sale, and in-store real-time cross-channel inventory visibility are only popular to 1/2 or less of average and underperformers. The big difference of opinion. This finally brings us to our recommendations. And I guess we can probably talk a little bit about how all this culminates in a single recommendation, which is do what winners do. But we're a little bit more detailed than that. I'll read these in highline, Steve, and you can comment on them. Our number one recommendation was to commit to being a part of the consumer's digital ecosystem. Talk a little bit about what that means.
Well, so the difficulty is talking a little bit about it, right?
Yeah.
You go back to our early days, and one of the things that seemed revelatory when we were, offering up this information, which, by the way, all of this is for free. If you are not familiar with us and you've never been to our website before, all of these reports going all the way back to 2007, God, there's probably over 130 of them at this point. They're all available for free to everyone. But what we talked about extensively in the early days is making sure that consumers understand that you are there to help solve their problem. That you are not there to sell them what you want to sell them. You are there to help them solve whatever problems it is that they're trying to solve for themselves. And to make yourself part of a consumer's ecosystem is to essentially stop thinking of yourself as this monolithic, antiquated service whereby you just stack up a bunch of products and hope that consumers are going to come in and buy them ravenously and say, oh my God, I need 3 of these and 2 of these and 5 of those. And recognize the fact that products have become a little bit more ubiquitous. They're available in all kinds of places that weren't available even 5-10 years ago. And that if a consumer is going to engage with you, you have to give them a reason to engage with you. You have to understand how they live, why they like your brand, what it is about your experience that is more enticing to them than just either doing a Google search or jumping on Amazon or whatever the direct competitor to you might be. And what that means is being with them in a way that demonstrates relevance. It's not personalization. It's not one-to-one marketing. I don't expect a retailer to wake up every day and send me a text message that says, Steve, I understand you got a busy day today. Why don't you come on down to this store? We have this personalized item for you. But what I do hope is that they're going to speak to me and engage with me in a way that is relevant to my life. That means offers, it means prices, it means promotions, it means products, it means community events, it means all the types of things that make me want to choose that particular brand. And so when we recommend to retailers at a baseline level that regardless of who they are, where they're based, what they sell, whether it's a high touch item or a low touch item or a high cost item or a low cost item, or whether it's fashion, again, it doesn't matter. Individualize your experience, particularly if you operate stores, to fit some part of a consumer's lifestyle that no one else is doing. And that might be very complicated, and it might be something really simple. But it doesn't change the fact that you're not going to get to that end result unless you rethink your own brand in these ways that, let's be honest, the pandemic caused a lot of retailers to do, some of them to much greater effect than others.
Right. I'll wrap that all up by saying, and it's a phrase we've used so often, we think of it as kind of trite, but it still means a lot. And that's that we have to recognize as practitioners that consumers now carry the store with them around in their purses and pockets. They don't go to a store, the store goes to them. So there are more recommendations, but we're out of time and we can't talk about them. What I'll do is I'll recommend to our listeners that they sign on to our website. As Steve just said, our research is always free to you. We don't share your names with anybody. We don't sell lists. We don't do those kinds of things. We just make it available to everybody so that you can learn and comment and share with us your insights. So our website is www.rsrresearch.com. And I believe that you can get to our website from the IORMA website as well. So we welcome you to come to visit us that way. Steve, thank you very much. I enjoyed writing this with you. We'll probably do it again next year because the store is changing fast.
Absolutely.
And with that, I'll just say have a great day, okay?